Is there a scenario where, say for example, the example you used, your tenancy starts on the 1st of January, ends December, and then the landlord serves you, the notice on that 31st of December, for example? Do you leave immediately, or you have to stay for another? You said 3 months. Is it that is standard 3 months or 6 months?
Okay. Let me go back to recovery of premises. Now, the whole the document that regulates your relationship with your landlord is your tenancy agreement, and
Okay.
it's very imperative that you have one. Now, it depends on your agreement with your landlord. If you agree with your landlord that you are a yearly tenant, as a yearly tenant, when your landlord wants to serve you a quick notice, you don't need more than a month. If you agree in that, then at the expiration of your tenancy, you'll be given just a month's notice. If you agree to 6 months notice, that is what would happen. However, if your tenancy agreement is silent on the notice, the duration of the notice, then you revert to the statutory notices. Under the Lagos State Tenancy Law, says that if you're a yearly tenant, then you're entitled to 6 months.
Okay.
If you're a 6 months, if you're a half yearly tenant, then you're entitled to 6 months. If you're a quarterly tenant, then you're entitled to 3 months notice. If you're a monthly tenant, then you're entitled to 1 month notice. If you're a weekly tenant, then you're entitled to 1 week notice. And what determines the kind of tenancy is how you pay your rent.
Rent,
So if
yeah.
you pay your yearly, then you're a yearly tenant. If you pay your rent half
Monthly
yearly,
and yeah,
then you're a
etc. Okay.
I
so
see.
it depends on what is in your tenancy agreement. So it's not standard. The only time you revert to statutory provision
Is
is
when
when your
the
tenancy
agreement is
agreement.
silent. Okay. Okay.
Some landlords don't prepare you for the change in rent. Some will
Okay.
say, okay, I want to be taking 6 months or per month, and then one day they wake up and say, I want 1 whole year. Sometimes people say, well, instead of paying me my full rent this year, you will take out the money for blah 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 that you did in your house, and then pay me what's left. Now that's for people who have an agreement with their landlord. But if you don't have an agreement with your landlord and then he wakes up and changes the rent without any prior information, do you legally have grounds to disagree or go to court? For example, I've paid 2 years of rent as I've moved in, because some people require 2 years, some people require a year. And then just before my 2 years expires, you say you want to increase the rent. Most people have to move out because they have to look for some place else. But do you legally have grounds to take that to court?
Okay. In the first instance, your rent is a covenant that you agreed with your landlord before moving into the property. So if there's going to be any increase, it has to be jointly agreed. It's illegal for landlords to unilaterally increase the rent without the consent of the tenant. Now, what the landlord is expected to do is, if there's a need to increase the rent, that's why if you look at your tenancy agreement, there's always a provision on what happens if there's the likelihood of a rent increase. So there must be a provision, a rental clause, to say that if probably some landlords will increase every 2 years at the rate of 5% increase, or probably every 3 years or every 5 years. But if your agreement is silent on that, what the landlord is supposed to do is to write you a letter as a tenant, intimating you of the need and giving reasons why he's going to increase the rent. Now, as a tenant, if you look at it, if you think that in the circumstances it is you think it is okay for him, you agree with the increase, then both of you have now come to an agreement to pay the rent, then you are bound by it. But if you think you want to challenge it, you have two choices. It's either you write back to your landlord to counter what he has proposed. It's either you agree a particular rent, or you want to stay on what you were originally paying. Or you can enter negotiations with your landlord to say, okay, I know you're entitled to this. Can you give me another year to pay the current money? Then I can pay next year. Or can so negotiations proceed. Now, if you think that you do not want to leave the property, you want to challenge it, then you can approach the court. But in most cases, I would say you should go to the Citizens Mediation Center. Lagos State has one, where they do a lot of mediation between landlord and tenants, particularly when it comes to rent increase. Because I don't think it's practical for you to approach the court. Of course, it's tasking, it takes a long time, then you have to still spend money. You have to engage the services of your legal practitioner. So in that case, I would say mediation. It should be mediation.
Yeah, my question is, my landlord served me a quick notice on the 30th of last month, a few days ago. And my rent started, I paid rent last year to be ending this month that we are now, this month ending. So I'm like wondering, because the content of the letter is due to the increment of things in the country, this or that, then my rent is increased by 25%. My next rent will be increased by 25%. So I'm like, I don't really understand the notice. So I want the lawyer to explain better for me on that, because I was thinking now, because I'm supposed to pay my rent this month now, my new rent this month, and the notice said your next rent will be increased by 25%.
Okay.
So
right.
is it the one that I'm supposed to pay now, this month, or after this one?
Well, okay. Before I answer that question, if he has paid as a yearly tenant, if he's a yearly tenant, then he cannot be given a quick notice short of his tenure, sort of the duration. However, if he's not a yearly tenant, if he's a 6 months, he's a half yearly tenant, then he will get 2 months notice.
Okay.
So I really don't understand what he's saying.
I did ask. I asked him if he was a yearly tenant, and he said yes.
Yes.
No. It cannot. That cannot be correct.
So what does he do? What does he do?
Olamide, you did mention something about.
You must ignore it. It means that the statutory notice is invalid.
Olamide, but you didn't mention something about the tenant agreement. What if it's actually contained in the agreement and he didn't maybe notice, or he didn't read it?
Okay, for that, I'm sure that there's no way you can be evicted from your property, from the house you occupy before the expiration of your tenancy. So in most cases, you pay in advance. So he would have paid for that whole year. So how can you evict him before the expiration of the tenancy? That cannot be correct.
Big question.
From a landlord, he said that a tenant had been paying his rent for a while, but recently the tenant started experiencing staggering payments from the tenant. So how does he quit, or how does he serve a quick notice
to the guy tenant? Because he no longer pays on time, so he staggers the payment.
Well, I think you should give him a quick notice. It depends if it's yearly or whatever the agreement. You should give him reasons. There's always you have to give reasons before you apply to recover your property. Yes. So with that, I think that is a breach of the covenant. Though he's been making his his payment. But if you look at most rental clauses, clauses for rent, what it says is that you must pay within a particular period of time, and you must pay punctual. You must be punctual in your payment. So a tenant that staggers his payment is not paying punctually. So that is a breach of the rent, and is entitled to apply to the court to recover his premises.
Olamide, you mentioned something. You said that a landlord cannot serve you quick notice before your rent expires. That it means that he has to serve you quick notice after your rent expires.
No.
Okay.
No. That quit notice cannot expire, right, before the expiration of your tenancy. So
Okay.
if you're a yearly tenant and you are paid in advance up until 31st of December,
Okay.
if they are going to apply, if your landlord is going to serve you a quit notice, it has to expire at the expiration. It has to terminate
Okay.
of your tenancy,
Okay.
not anything shorter. If it gives you anything shorter, then the notice is invalid.
Ah, great. We were talking about, you were trying to answer a question about the three-pronged question, the guy who has to make repairs in the house, and then the landlord is saying, I can't make those repairs while you're there. You have to vacate the premises for me to be able to do it. So his whole money was refunded to him. But then he had very little time to find where to stay. So he had to stay a little longer for a month. And then now the landlord is asking him to pay for the time that he stayed back.
In the first place, the landlord was very wrong to have refunded the money back to him, because the moment that the rent exchange hands, then he becomes a tenant. Now, if he's going to, he cannot tell him to he can't evict him from the property almost immediately.
Okay.
He has to give him notice. So it now depends, is he a yearly notice, yearly tenant and all of that. So he must stay there, and I think the tenant should not hand over the property until the expiration of the notice that they agreed upon. And of course, he's going to pay the men's profits. So he can now prorate it that, okay, if he's supposed to pay 120,000 for a year, it means that he's likely, so his rent to come up to 10,000 naira every month. So if he's staying for 6 months, then he pays the landlord 60,000 naira. The moment he's handed in, is moved into the property, and is paid the consideration for the time and occupation and the use of that property, he becomes a tenant and cannot be evicted immediately. Okay. He's entitled to the time that they agreed upon as notice for quit.